We're in the Gemara today on Daf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. We begin today in the Gemara where it says Mokim Shenagu. The first word on the line is Asuki. The Gemara here continues with the Mishnah that was discussing the different halachas, and here the Minhagim regarding halal. So it said in the Mishnah, Mokim Shenagu Lichpel, in a place where the minig is to double the words or the psukim of halal, so you follow that minig. Tana, we learned Abraisa, Rebbe, Koifel, Bod, Varim. Rebbe would double certain psukim of halal, so as Rashi says, he would double from Ana Shemashina and going further. From there, the minig was to double it, to say after the Chazan. The Chazan said Ana Shemashina, and then you followed after him Ana Shemashina. So once we do that by Ana Shemashina, from there to the end, we continue the same way and we double all the psukim of halal. That was Rabbi's minig. Rabbi Lazar ben Prata, Meisef Badvarim. Rabbi Lazar ben Prata would add and then would double from earlier on. He would double from Oitcha further on. As Rashi explained earlier, that because that kapitel, starting from Hoidum and Ameitzar, there's a lot of psukim that repeat itself there. So therefore from Oitcha, he also doubled the psukim, that it should be similar to the rest of the kapitel, so he would double from there till the end of the halal. Amar Abaye says, Meisif Lichbail, when it says here that he doubled, it's Moitcha Lamata, going from Oitcha further, as I just explained. Then it said in the Mishnah, Levarech, Yevarech, where the minig was to make a bracha after halal, you make the bracha. So Amar Abaye explains, Lo Yishanu Ela L'achra. When it says in the Mishnah, Levarech, Yevarech, it's only referring to the bracha after halal. Aval Lefanov, but the bracha before halal, mitzvah Levarech. It's a mitzvah to make a bracha before. Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmuel, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Kol ha-mitzvahs kulan, mevarach alein, oiver l'asiyasan. All the mitzvahs, you make a bracha on the mitzvah, and the bracha has to be made before the mitzvah is done. So same thing here by halal, saying halal is a mitzvah, and therefore you make a bracha before halal. How do we see in this word oiver? Oiver usually means to pass by. How does the word oiver means to say before? Rav Nachman by Yitzchak. Tichsiv, Vayoratz, Achimatz, Derech HaKikar, Achimatz ran on the plain, in the field. Vayaver es HaKushi, and he passed ahead of the Kushi. So we see that Vayaver means he went ahead. Abaye says, Mehocha. The Raya is from the following pasuk. It says, V'hu Ovar Lifneim, and he passed through in front of them. This is by Yaakov when he came to greet Esav, and he went ahead of the other groups of his family. So we see that Ovar means ahead of them. Another proof is the pasuk says Vayaver Malkom Lifneim V'Hashem Bereisham, that the king went in front of them and the Eibush is at their head. So we see that Vayaver means to go ahead. Taisvis here discusses, is a long Taisvis, discussing this halacha of making the bracha before you do the mitzvah. How is that applied regarding lulav? How could you make the bracha before the mitzvah of lulav? Which is a subject that's brought up also in the Gemara in Pesachim and Daf Zayin. So Taisus here gives a few options. In other words, the problem is that the mitzvah of lulav is a lakachtem, just to take it into your hands. But once you took it into your hands, that's after the mitzvah, you are yaitze. To make the bracha before you take it into your hands, while it's lying on the table, you don't make a bracha that way. You don't make a bracha when it's on the table, it has to be in your hands. That's too far, oiver la'oiver, it's too far before the mitzvah. So you can't make the bracha before, so when are you going to make the bracha? So one option Taisus says is, you should pick up the lulav and the esrig, and you hold the esrig shalei kederech gidulei, upside down. So you're not yaitze the mitzvah. It's in your hands, you make the bracha, and then after the bracha you turn over the esrig. That's the minig of many. Another minig Taisus says that you can pick up the lulav with the hadasim and the aravis, you make the bracha then, and then you take the esrig in your hands after the bracha. So you can make the bracha because you're holding the lulav in your hands, but it's before you fulfill the mitzvah because you have to have all four minim. Another eitzah Taisus says is, we know that there's a machlokes whether when you do a mitzvah, whether it needs kavanah or doesn't need kavanah, but everybody agrees that if you explicitly have kavanah not to be yaitze the mitzvah, you're not yaitze. So you can pick up the lulav and esrog with the explicit kavanah not to be yaitze. So you didn't do the mitzvah yet, you make the bracha, and then you have kavanah to be yaitze. So you made the bracha before you were yaitze the mitzvah. Another thing Taisus says is that could be you could just pick up the lulav and esrog, even if you're having a mind to be yaitze, and you were yaitze the ikar mitzvah, but there's another part of the mitzvah, the nanuim, the shaking of the lulav and the esrog. So until you don't finish that part, you didn't complete the mitzvah fully. So you can make the bracha after you pick it up, but before the nanuim, because that's still a part of the mitzvah. So from this part of Taisus, you see that the nanuim is not just some kind of a thing with the rabbanon that you add, that you do, like we said before in the Gemara, latze tlalim and ruchis reis, but it's actually a part of the mitzvah. It's a hemshech of the mitzvah, and you can make the bracha before the nanuim. Sagt der Heilige Mishneh, halikeach lulav mechaveirei. Person that buys a lulav from his friend. And as Rashi says, when it says a friend, it refers to an amaretz. The Gemara, the Mishnah and the Gemara will be discussing buying a lulav and esrig in the year of Shemitah. We're coming up now to a year of Shemitah. So when it says here chaveirei, it refers specifically to a case where you're buying the lulav and esrig from an amaretz. So much so that Rashi actually says that the right gersa in the Mishnah should be alekech lulav me'am haaretz, because chaveirei is usually not the term used for an am haaretz. So you're buying the lulav and esrig from an am haaretz, b'shvius in Shemitah. So now noisin loy esrig. You should ask him that he should give you the esrig as a gift. You're not allowed to buy noisin esrig b'matona. He should give it to you as a gift. You're not allowed to buy an esrig in Shemitah year. And the Gemara will explain why not. And as we see here in the Mishnah, the issue of buying in Shemitah is specifically regarding the esrig, not regarding the lulav, which will also be explained in the Gemara. Sagt the Gemara, but first the Gemara gives you additional advice. What happens if this amaretz does not want to give you that esrig as a matana? He wants to charge you for it full price. So what are you going to do now? Amar Ravone, so Ravone says, Mavli alei demei esrig belulav. So include the money that you would pay for the esrig in the price of the lulav. So the lulav, if it would be $10, pay for the lulav $50, $100, a more expensive price, then that will include the price that then you'll get the esrig, and the esrig you're getting for free. So that's the halach of Mavliya. But now the question is, what's the issue of just buying the esrig of Shemitah directly, without including it in the price of the lulav? What's the problem here? So the Gemara wants to understand the very inyan itself. Is what is the problem of buying an esrig in Shemitah? So Taisus here points out that the truth is that in many scenarios, the issue of buying an esrig in Shemitah is simple. It says regarding the produce of Shemitah la'achla, that you eat it. You're not allowed to do any business with it. So you're not allowed to buy it. You're not allowed to do any business. The meicher is not allowed to sell it in Shemitah. Okay, so why does the Gemara ask this question? So Taisus says, but there are many scenarios where you are allowed to sell in Shemitah. If you're not selling it yourself, if your son is selling it, or if you're not selling it for a profit, you're selling it for cheap at cost price. And in our Mishnah it says that as the Mefarshim say, it's mashma that the Mishnah is talking about any case, even in cases where there's no issue of schayra. So the question of the Gemara is, if so, why can't you buy the esrig directly without including it in the price of the lulav? So the Gemara answers, there's another problem here. We're buying it from an amaretz. Lefi she'ein meisrin dmei peiris shvius la'amaretz. You're not allowed to give the money that you paid for the value of the esrig to an amaretz. And the Gemara brings a source of this. Why not? The Tanya will learn in a brayse. Ein meisrin dmei peiris shvius la'amaretz. You're not allowed to give money. You're not allowed to pay money for something that you're buying from Shemitah, even in a case where you're allowed to use it for schayra. But still, you're not allowed to pay him the money for this, because that money is Shemitah money. And Shemitah money has to be treated in a very specific way. I'll explain in a second. And the Braisa adds, Yeser mimazon shalish sudis. If the value of this food, this produce that you're buying, and the money you're giving him, is more than to buy 3 sudis, you're not allowed to buy from an amaretz. Now, what's the pshat in this? What's the issue of giving money to an amaretz for produce of Shemitah? So the reason is very simple, because when you buy the produce of Shemitah, the fruits of Shemitah have a certain kedusha in them and have to be treated in a certain way. The basic halacha of the produce of Shemitah is you have to eat it within the year of Shemitah. You're not allowed to leave it for later. So if you have money that you bought, that you paid for the produce of Shemitah, that money has to also be used within the year of Shemitah itself. And you could only buy specific things with that money. Food that you're going to eat in the year of Shemitah, not other things, clothing and things like that. So Rashi says the issue is we're concerned that the amaretz will take this money and he's going to put it away. He's going to save the money for after Shemitah, which is not allowed. Taisva says the issue is that he might misuse the money. He might buy things with it that are not supposed to be bought. There's only a limited amount of things, food and things like that you're allowed to buy with this money. So therefore you're not allowed to give money for the produce of Shemitah to an amaretz. And Rashi says the issue is you're causing him to stumble, to misuse this money. Okay, but that's only if you're giving him a lot of money. So then there's a concern that he's going to keep it for later. But if you're giving him just a little bit of money, which is enough for the meal of one day, and the meal of one day is 3 suddis, which that's the meal of one day for Shabbos really. We have to eat 3 suddis. But they also gave that same shiur for every day, including for a weekday. So then we're not concerned that he's going to save the money for later. We could rely on the fact that he's going to use the money for the food that he needs to buy himself right now within the year of Shemitah. So that's the issue over here in the Mishnah. You can't buy the esrog directly from the Amoretz because you're paying him money for this esrog. That's Shemitah money. And we were concerned, you're causing this Amoretz to misuse this money not appropriately, the way it's supposed to be used for Shemitah. The Braisa continues, V'im Mosar, if you forgot and you did buy something from an Amoretz and you paid him for this produce and it's Shemitah money that he has now, so that you don't want him to keep that Shemitah money, so Yaimar, the Chaver, the Yisrael, the Yid that gave this Amoretz this money should say, Hare Mois Halalu, this money that I gave to this Amoretz, Yu Mechulalin Al Peiris Sheyeshli B'toich Beisi. It should be Mechulal, I redeem that money, that it should not have any more the Kedusha of Shemitah, and I want to transfer the Kedusha of Shemitah to the Peiris that I have in my house. So like this, that money does not have the Kedusha of Shemitah. And then, as the Gemara says, Uva v'eichlom b'kedushas shviyas, and then the fruits that you have in your house, that you just transferred the Kedusha of Shemitah from that money to, you have to eat them with the proper Kedusha of Shemitah. As Rashi says, which is eating, drinking, and using it in the appropriate ways that Shemitah produce could be used. Taisus here points out that usually this is something that's not done. You can't exchange the Kedusha, transfer, bimachalal, the Kedusha of money to produce that you have in your possession if that money is not even in your possession anymore. The money is in the possession of the Amoretz. It's not in your possession to make this exchange. So therefore Taisus says this entire thing that the Braisa is saying you should do to exchange it this way is only a knas, for the fact that you weren't careful not to pay for the money of, not to pay for the produce of Shemitah and give money to an Amoretz. So as a knas, even though it doesn't really take effect, but this is a knas that should be done. But then the Braisa continues and says, Bamed dvarim amurim, when is the point that we said before, that if it's only a little bit of money that you paid for the Amoretz, it's only the money for 3 suddis for what he eats in one day, so that's allowed. That's bilikeach min amufker. If you're buying from an Amoretz, from produce that you see is left hefker, which is one of the halachas of Shemitah. One of the mitzvahs of Shemitah is v'ashvi is tishmetana on the tashta, that you have to leave the produce of Shemitah open, hefker, available for anyone to take. So if you see that this produce that the Amoretz is using is coming from a field of hefker, so then there's more reason to rely that he won't misuse the money. And therefore over here, if it's not a lot of money, we rely on the fact that he's going to use it for his Sukkah today, and you can leave it by him. But if you're buying from an Amoretz, and this is coming from produce that's being guarded in the field, he's not keeping the Shemitah properly, it's Meshumer. So then, since we see that he's not keeping Shemitah in this, so therefore, we're afraid that he's also not going to use the money properly. So then, afilu b'kechatzi iser aser, even to pay him for produce of Shemitah, a half a iser, a tiny amount of money, you're not allowed to give him either, because there's a real chashash, there's a real concern that he's going to misuse this money, just like we see that he's not keeping Shemitah properly. So now we have this distinction here, that usually you're allowed to give an Amoretz money by you buying produce of Shemitah from him when it's just a little bit of the money that just for 3 suddis. So the Gemara says, Masav Rav Sheishes Umin Amufker. And if you're buying from an Amoretz and you see that the produce came from a field where things are left to be hefker, Gimel Suddis, Vesulo, you're only allowed to pay him that amount, that tiny amount, which is for the meal, 3 suddis for a day, and not more. You're not allowed to buy more from him. But Veramini, I'll ask you a contradiction from what it says in the Braisa. And the Braisa gives examples of different things that grow in the field that are left to be hefker. They grow wild and nobody uses them. Nobody cares for them to keep them protected. Hapigam, v'hayarvuzin, certain types of herbs, v'hashitim, which is another kind of vegetable. Let's see over here, it says on the side, this is asparagus. V'chalagloigis, which is also a kind of vegetable, which over here it says this is regila, maybe arugula in English. V'akuzbar shebaharim. Kuzber from the mountains. Again, another kind of vegetable. Let's see, it says here in the size, it's a gad. Forgot the English translation for this. Karpus that comes shebenaris from the rivers, growing near the rivers. Garger shalefer, and garger that grows near in the swamps. So over here it says also certain kinds of flowers and things like that. All of these things, Peturim and Meiser, they're potter from Meiser, and the reason is because it's Hefker. These are things that grow wild and are left Hefker, so there's no din of Meiser for something which is Hefker. And v'nikachim mikoladam b'shvius. You're allowed to buy it from anybody in the year of Shemitah, nishma, because there's nothing of this kinds of these species that are guarded, that people care for. They're left wild. So as Rashi explains, even though Shemitah applies even to things that grow Hefker, but because it's something that grows Hefker, so even if you're buying it from an Amaretz, and we're not sure if he kept that Hefker or not, but since these are things that are usually kept Hefker, we assume that the Amaretz kept Shemitah with these and he kept them Hefker, so therefore he's keeping Shemitah properly with them, so we can buy it from him. And it seems from this, but I say you can buy it as much as quantity as you want, and you can pay him as much money as you want. It doesn't give here any limitation, only the amount of 3 sudas, as we said before, that even when you're buying something from an Amaretz and you know that he kept it Hefker, but nevertheless there's a limitation only for 3 sudas, but not more. So that's the contradiction here. Over here there's no limitation. So the Gemara says, Hu Ma'isiv La, V'hu Mefarek La. Rav Sheshes is the one that asked this question and he gave the answer. That B'chdi Man Shanu, that it did say in the Braise that you could only pay for that as much as you need for a Suda of one day. That you could only buy the amount of a Suda of one day. As we said before, 3 Sudas. My mashma the hayman lishna de mezainihu. This language that the Braise uses, that you could only buy the amount of man. How do we know that this language means the amount that you use for the food of a day? Because another pasuk that says vayeman lahem amelech, and the melech prepared, and it's speaking there about the fact that he prepared a meal. So you see that this is the lashon of the sudas that you need for one day. Now the Gemara comes back to our Mishnah. So what did we say in the Mishnah? That you're not allowed to buy from the Amaretz and Esrik because you don't want him to use the money, which is Shemitah money, misuse it in the wrong time or in the wrong way. The question though is, if so, lulav nami, this problem should be applied to the lulav as well. Why only to the Esrik? As the Gemara is going to explain in the next daf, we'll learn in Mitzvah Shem, it says there that the Kedusha of Shemitah applies to the lulav as well. So the money that you buy, the lulav of Shemitah, it also has the Kedusha of Shemitah. So you should apply the same limitation there, that you're not allowed to buy it from him unless it's a mazan of 3 sudas. So Gemara answers that lulav is different. Lulav bar shishis hanichnas l'shvius. The lulav that you're buying right before Sukkah in the year of Shemitah, this is a lulav that did not grow in the year of Shemitah. It's only 2 weeks from the beginning of the year of Shemitah. It grew the year before. So because it grew mostly in the year before, so therefore this is not a lulav of Shemitah. So the lulav is not the issue. It's only the esrog that's the issue. Frekta Gemara b'riyachi, if so, esrog nami. Apply the same thing regarding the esrog. Bas shishis anechnesas l'shviyasu. This esrog grew in the 6th year, and it enters 2 weeks into the 7th year, into the Shemitah year, and therefore there's no issue with the esrog either. So what's the story here? Why is there a distinction between the lulav and the esrog? So the Gemara answers there is a difference. The esrog tree is unique. It has a different halacha. Esrog, when it comes to the esrog, basar lekita azlinon. We follow the status of the esrog, whether it's considered to be a Shemitah esrog or not. We look at the time when the esrog was collected, when it was taken from the tree, not in the year where it grew mostly. When it comes to the lulav, or really when it comes to all trees, you follow the time of chanata, when it blossomed, or maybe when it grew mostly. But when it comes to the esrog, it's different than all trees. The reason why esrog is different than all trees, we had this point before, it's a weaker tree, and therefore it doesn't just rely on rainwater, it relies on kol mayim, you have to keep on watering it, and therefore it has a different halacha than the rest of trees. And when it comes to the status of the esrog, you define whether it's part of Shemitah or not, according to Lakita. And since it was collected, it was taken off the tree in Shemitah, so there is an issue with the esrog. But not with the lulav. The lulav grew mostly in the year before. So that's the difference between the lulav and the esrog. But the Gemara questions this. There's a Braise that discusses the special status of an esrog. And there in that Braise we see Bein Rabbi Gamliel or Bein Rabbi Eliezer, both Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer, le'in yishvius, regarding the halacha of Shemitah, Esrig, basar, chanotas, linon. The status of the esrig, whether it's part of Shemitah or not, follows the time when it blossomed, when it began growing, not the time when it was collected from the tree. Titznan, we learned, it's actually a Mishnah. We learned in the Mishnah Masechta Shvius, Esrig, Shavele, Ilon, Begimel Drachim. There are three ways regarding three halachas that an esrig has the same halachas as a tree. And what are they? The Mishnah will say in a second. And there's one halacha that it's compared to a vegetable. We compare it to a tree in three ways. La'arla, the halacha of arla, the first 3 years that you're not allowed to have anah from the produce applies. U'lerevai, the halacha of the 4th year that you have to bring it to Yerushalayim. U'leshvius, and regarding Shemitah, we compare an esrig to a regular tree. Just like a regular tree, you go according to the year that the chanata where it began growing, so too regarding the esrig. So here we see clearly, according to the first opinion, that regarding Shemitah, an esrig is just like any tree. The esrig and the lulav will be the same. The esrig tree has a halacha like a vegetable in one halacha, which is shebishas likitasai isuroi. Regarding the meiser, to define which year of Meiser it belongs to, that goes according to the year that it was collected. As Rashi here brings, there are different halachas of Meisers. When you come the first year after Shemitah, so you have to give Meiser Rishon and then Meiser Sheni. When it comes to the following year, or the 3rd year, so then instead of Meiser Sheni, you give Meiser Oni. You exchange the Meiser. So how do you know which year it belongs to? So when it comes to vegetables, you follow the time when it's collected. So regarding this halacha, an esrig tree, which grows on all waters and not just rainwater, like vegetables that constantly have to be watered, it has the halacha like a vegetable. So, but this is only regarding the din of Meiser. Meisers, not benegeya to Shemitah. Divrei Rabbi Gamliel. This is Rabbi Gamliel's opinion. Rabbi Eliezer says, esrig shaveli ilan l'chol dava. An esrig has the same exact halacha as every tree in every way. Even regarding Meiser, makes no difference. So the point over here is, we see that both Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer say regarding Shemitah that the esrig is like a regular tree. So how did we make before a distinction according to our Tana between lulav and esrig? That lulav is considered to be from the previous year, not Shemitah, and esrig we follow the status of the year that it was collected in the Shemitah. So the Gemara answers, Hu the Amar ki hai Tana. The Tana of our Mishnah that makes this distinction between esrig and lulav is following the opinion of this Tana here. The Tanya, because we learned in the Braisa, it says, Amar Rav Yosi. Rav Yosi said, Avtulmus, Avtulmus testified, Mishum Chamisha Zekanim, in the name of 5 elders, Esrig Achalekita Lemeiser. The halacha of Esrig regarding Meiser is when you collect it. As I explained before, because it's Gadol al Kol Mayim, it's similar to the way it grows on all water, so therefore it's compared to the vegetables regarding Meiser. That was what he said in the name of Chamisha Zekanim. V'Rabbiseinu Nimnu B'Usha, but our Rebbes took account in Usha, and they came to the conclusion of Amru, and they said, Bein leMeiser, Bein leShvius, whether it's for the purpose of Meiser or for the purpose of Shemitah. So for both of them, the esrig follows the time of Lakita. The time when it's collected, that's what establishes if it's part of Shemitah or if it's in Shemitah or not, or from which Meiser it's chayiv or not. So the Gemara clarifies Pshat in this Braisa, Shvius mandachar Shmei. Why is the Gemara bringing that Rabbi Seinu said both for Shemitah and for Meisers? In the Tana before this, Rabbi Yosi never spoke about Shemitah b'chlal, he just spoke about Meiser. He didn't mention a word about Shemitah that the next Tana is coming and saying both for Shemitah and for Meiser. So the Gemara clarifies the Pshat is, Chsure Mechser is something's missing here in this Braisa, and Valchi Ketani, this is what it has to say. That the Tana Kama said, Esrig, Achalekita Lemeiser, the halacha of Esrig, when it comes to Meiser, the status of the Esrig is when it's collected. And regarding Shemitah, we look at the time when it began growing, when it began blossoming. That was the Tana Kama, Rabbi Yosi, that brought that they said in the name of Chamishas Kanim. And on that, Rabbi Seinu, Nimnu B'Usha, but our Rebbes and Usha took account and they said, V'amru, Esrig, Basa Lekita, or Acha Lekita, the Bach says, Bein LeMeiser, Bein LeShvius. Both for Meiser and for Shemitah, you follow the time when it's collected, and only if it's collected in Shemitah does it have the halacha of Shemitah. So it's this opinion of Rabbi Seinu that our Mishnah follows, and that's the distinction between lulav and esrig. Lulav grew mostly in the previous year, so it's not part of Shemitah. The esrig, which was collected now in this year, Shemitah, and therefore it does have the kedusha of Shemitah, and therefore the Mishnah says you shouldn't buy it from an Ammonaritz, you should ask him to give it to you as a gift.